In 2013, the FBI lured a Navy defense contractor to a San Diego hotel with the promise of business, but instead of discussing a multi-million-dollar defense contract, he found himself in the custody of federal agents. His name is Leonard Glenn Francis, a 350-pound Malaysian businessman, but the public mostly knows him as Fat Leonard. For over a decade, he bribed Navy officers with escorts, luxury trips, and expensive dinners. In return, they handed him classified documents, falsified contracts, and had insiders reroute aircraft carriers and destroyers to ports that he controlled to overcharge for fueling, tugboats, and other harbor services to the tune of tens of millions. And while on house arrest, due to health concerns stemming from his obesity, he escaped. This is the story of the corruption, escape, and recapture of the U.S. Navy's biggest scandal in recent years. The Fat Leonard scandal is an ongoing investigation and prosecution of corruption within the United States Navy that took place during the 2000s and 2010s. It has involved ship support contractor Glenn Defense Marine Asia, or GDMA, a Thai subsidiary of the Glenn Marine Group. The Washington Post calls the scandal perhaps the worst national security breach of its kind to hit the Navy since the end of the Cold War. The company's chief executive, president, and chairman, a Malaysian national, Leonard Glenn Francis, Fat Leonard, has bribed a large number of uniformed officers of the United States 7th Fleet.
Everybody was in my pocket. I had them in my palm. I was just rolling them around. When you are attending $1,000 plate dinner, that is a bribe.
Offering at least $500,000 in cash, plus travel expenses, luxury items, parties, and prostitutes, all in return for classified materials. The classified information included the movements of U.S. ships and submarines, confidential contacting information, and any details about active criminal investigations into Glenn Defense Marine Asia. Francis then exploited the intelligence for illicit profit, brazenly ordering his moles to redirect aircraft carriers, ships, and subs to ports he controlled in Southeast Asia so he could more easily bilk the Navy for fuel, tugboats, and other services. He also directed them to author Bravo Zulu memos, which is an informal term for a letter of commendation from the Navy given to civilians who have performed outstanding services in order to bolster GDMA's credibility for their jobs well done. The first activities of the conspiracy were confirmed to have existed in 2006 when Francis recruited numerous Navy personnel to engage in corruption, including directing contracts toward his firms, disfavoring his competitors, and inhibiting legitimate fiscal and operational oversight. The initial co-conspirators labeled themselves the Cool Kids and the Wolf Pack. In 2006, Dave Schaus, a naval officer, became suspicious of GDMA contracts, but the scrutiny was brought to Francis's attention by an informant, Paul Simpkins. Simpkins, a decorated veteran of the U.S. Air Force, employed as a civilian contracting officer by the Navy in Singapore, managed to firewall any inquiry made against Francis and had Schaus's position terminated. "What else could I have done to expose this racket?" Schaus asked. Exposed as a whistleblower, he said officers made my life hell after discovering he had attempted to initiate an investigation of the GDMA. The Washington Post reported that in 2007, the Navy's Inspector General forwarded a document claiming GDMA was grossly overcharging the Navy for providing port security, but the Naval Criminal Investigation Services, NCIS, may have failed to follow up on this warning. According to a senior Navy officer, everybody knew that Glenn Defense had been under investigation. Everybody also knew that nothing ever happened with those investigations. After that, the Manila NCIS office got an anonymous letter and documents alleging GDMA had overcharged for fees, armed guards, and other services during a Philippines port visit by the Fred Stockham container support ship. I hope you share the same concern when reading these, and take swift action to stamp out this fraud, waste, and abuse, the letter said. Manila's NCIS agents forwarded the paperwork to Navy's Singapore contracting office, but it had been infiltrated by GDMA's moles, and they claimed the allegations were false and closed the cases. Mike Lang, a contracting officer who worked there from 2006 to 2008, said they'd always side with the Glenn Defense and paint us as the troublemakers. They'd say, "Why are you harassing our contractors? You're just making my job hard." Two officials from that office, Simpkins and his subordinate, Sharon Cower, who was a civilian Navy contracting officer, as well as a former GDMA employee, were sentenced to 6 years and 33 months respectively, with Cower doing her time in Singapore. The NCIS reportedly opened and closed as many as 27 investigations without taking any action against the GDMA. Documents obtained by the Washington Post through the Freedom of Information Act requests revealed that after Al-Qaeda committed the October 2000 suicide attack on the USS Cole and the September 11, 2001 attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, the Navy's Economic Crimes Unit was reduced from a staff of 140 to only 9 persons, most of them having been reassigned to terrorism. At least 27 separate investigations had been opened, but later closed without action, thanks to the intervention of senior Navy personnel who were in league with Francis. In response to GDMA's capability to sometimes deliver on complex services to the Navy, the reaction to these oversights and their prosecution were slow at best. In 2016, Commander Mike Mashevik, an officer who was later convicted, told Defense News he was a crook, but he was our crook. John Hogan, the NCIS Executive Assistant Director for Criminal Operations, admitted, in hindsight, maybe we could have dug a little bit deeper than we did. In 2010, Navy officials became suspicious that some of the invoices submitted by GDMA from Thailand were inflated. The escalating costs prompted the Navy to build a logistics team to keep contracts somewhat in check, but it was frustrated because Francis had a spy, Jose Luis Sanchez, who acted as a firewall and fed the information back to Francis. Sanchez later pleaded guilty to conspiracy and in 2022 awaited sentencing. Despite the increasing awareness that the Navy was being subjected to massive fraud, GDMA was still able to secure contracts for $200 million in 2011. After a 3-year investigation and having planted false information that their inquiries had been closed, Francis let off his guard, and federal agents were able to lure him to the United States. In September of 2013, he was arrested at a San Diego hotel in a sting operation where he pleaded guilty in January of 2015 and was awaiting sentencing. Francis admitted to using his U.S. Navy contacts, including ship captains, to obtain classified information and to defraud the Navy of tens of millions of dollars by having ships directed to specific ports which he serviced in the Pacific and falsifying the service charges. In his plea, Francis identified 7 Navy officials who accepted his bribes. He faced a maximum prison sentence of 25 years and agreed to forfeit $35 million in personal assets, an amount he admitted to overcharging the Navy. Due to medical problems, however, he was able to live under home detention beginning in 2018 in San Diego. While awaiting to be sentenced in late September of 2022, on the 4th of September, Fat Leonard cut his ankle monitor and became a fugitive on the run just weeks before his court date. Since 2013, 31 people have been criminally charged in connection with Fat Leonard. According to the investigators, by November 2017, more than 440 people, including 60 admirals, had come under scrutiny under the inquiry. The Navy held a military trial for a still-serving commander, David A. Morales. Due to his current service, he was the first to not be given a civilian trial. He was charged with bribery, conspiracy to commit bribery, falsifying official statements, failure to obey lawful orders, and conduct unbecoming of an officer. As of September 2018, 30 people had pleaded guilty. 12 others had been charged, including 8 Navy officers who were indicted in March of 2017. 4 admirals were disciplined by the military. 2 others, a 4-star Admiral Robert Willard and 3-star Joe Donnelly, were known to be under investigation, and more than 150 other identified people had been scrutinized. Among the 19 people who have pleaded guilty to federal crimes, one was Francis himself. 2 others were his top deputies, and 16 others were Navy personnel. The highest ranking was Rear Admiral Robert Gilbo, who was convicted in June 2016 after pleading guilty to making false statements to investigators about his contact with Francis, becoming the first Navy admiral in modern American history to be convicted of a felony while on active duty. On May 17, 2017, U.S. District Judge Janice San Martino sentenced Gilbo to 18 months in prison, although he was allowed to continue collecting his nearly $10,000 monthly pension. He was held in FCI Englewood, a low-security federal prison in Littleton, Colorado, and was released on November 1st of 2018. The National University of Singapore noted that the procurement in the defense industry is particularly vulnerable to bribery and corruption. It is usually not that transparent, with infrequent biddings for large contracts. According to its spokesman, Captain Amy Derrick, the U.S. Navy canceled all contracts with GDMA as of the result of the 2013 audit. On September 4th, 2022, 7:30 in the morning, Francis removed his ankle bracelet and fled his rented San Diego home. Francis had been living in the home with his mother and 3 children. Judge San Martino had ordered 24-hour surveillance at Francis's expense, but had expressed concerns in the past when a security guard had been absent from their post for hours at a time. After he fled, it was revealed by his guards that while on duty, they had been confined to a small garage inside the home. In a closed-door hearing in 2018, the judge expressed concerns that if Francis were to escape and end up back in Malaysia for whatever reason, it would have to be asked, who let somebody do this without any security? Neighbors reported that cars displaying out-of-state licenses were parked outside the home 4 days before the escape, and a U-Haul truck had been there just 2 days before Francis disappeared. It was believed that he cut off his ankle monitor between the hours of 7:30 and 8 a.m. on September 4th, and notice was only taken when a call was received by the San Diego police at 2 p.m. That day, when federal agents arrived, no security personnel were found to be present at the home. Francis was recaptured on September 22, 2022, 17 days after his escape. He was arrested at the Simón Bolívar International Airport in Venezuela. It was thanks to an Interpol red notice that he was about to board a plane to Russia that he was caught. He had flown from Mexico to Cuba and then on to Venezuela by himself. His children were no longer with him, and the Director General of Interpol Venezuela disclosed the arrest. He said that Francis was handed to the Venezuelan authorities for possible extradition proceedings. Francis had requested asylum in Venezuela, and in mid-October of 2022, Venezuela's highest court set a 2-month deadline for the U.S. to file an extradition request to retrieve Francis. Judge San Martino scheduled a status hearing date for December 14th in San Diego, and in December 2023, despite the tense relationship with the United States, Venezuela agreed to allow the extradition of Francis. He was turned over to U.S. custody and arrived in Miami, Florida on December 21st. Early into the case, Francis's attorneys requested permission to withdraw from the representation of him, and he was given 45 days to find new counsel. On November 5th, 2024, Francis was sentenced to 180 months in prison and ordered to pay $20 million in restitution. In addition, Francis was also ordered to forfeit $35 million of ill-begotten gains. The scope of the GDMA investigation inadvertently hindered the Navy's ability to fill senior leadership roles, unintentionally delayed hundreds of officers' careers, and depleted the Navy's high-level staff. Hundreds of those who had not even been compromised still needed investigations that stalled promotions for years, according to Ray Mabus, the then Secretary of the Navy. If Leonard Francis mentioned anybody's names, or it seemed to us that if somebody had served in a senior position in the Pacific during this time, which covered a lot of folks, they were caught up in this until their names could be pulled out. It took in a huge percentage of flag officers, and it really hamstrung the Navy in terms of promotions, in terms of positions, with his opinion widely shared. The Navy elected to take only a handful to court-martial, issuing at least 12 letters of censure from Mabus and his successor, with some 40 other administrative actions. In early 2018, there were roughly 170 names still pending before the Consolidated Disposition Authority. It's really been pretty devastating to the upper ranks of the Navy, said Mabus. There were really bad people here. You gotta catch them. You got to make sure they're punished. But there were a lot of people that didn't do anything that got caught up in this as well.